The city of Sirte, once the crowning jewel of the Islamic State in Libya. It was part of 150 miles of ISIS-controlled coastline from 2015 to the end of 2016. Today, the city has been reduced to rubble. First, in an offensive against ISIS led by Libyan security forces in 2016. Then, by nearly 500 precision airstrikes from the United States. Bombing largely ceased last year. Large swaths of town remain abandoned. The government has yet to clear hundreds of corpses beneath the rubble for fear of mines and unexploded ordnance. Because of that, the air is still thick with the stench of rotting bodies. Colonel Ibrahim Bin Rabaa is the commander of Libyan counter-terrorism forces in Sirte.
My son volunteered to fight ISIS and protect Sirte. ISIS killed him. He was 24 years old.
The 6-month offensive eventually wiped out an estimated 2,500 ISIS combatants. But Bin Rabaa tells us sleeper cells still lurk, especially in Sirte's desert. Though it no longer controls any territory, the terror group is successfully carrying out more attacks in Libya. The spike in violence has been sharp. In 2017, ISIS managed to pull off only 4 attacks. So far this year, it's more than a dozen. The most audacious was in May, when ISIS gunmen stormed Libya's election commission headquarters in Tripoli, detonated suicide vests, and killed at least 16 civilians. These counter-terrorism forces in Sirte recently raised the ISIS threat level in the area from 70% to 100%.
So ISIS is in this direction. They're regrouping in the desert here in the south.
At any time, they can come in, 1 or 2 people, and blow themselves up. We rely on shepherds to tell us if there are any ISIS fighters passing through their pastures.
So far this year in Libya, there have already been more than twice the number of ISIS attacks. Is ISIS trying to regroup in order to launch attacks abroad, outside of Libya as well?
Right now, they lack the ability to control any major territory in Libya. But they're doing their best to regroup and mount attacks again. Our men have proven themselves in this war with the Islamic State, but we ask and we hope for help from other countries. We cannot eradicate ISIS on our own.
That's largely because ISIS isn't Libya's only problem. The country has been reeling since 2011, the year of the NATO-backed overthrow of Libyan strongman Muammar Gaddafi. By 2014, a full-blown civil war was underway. Carnegie Endowment Senior Associate Frederick Wary has a new book about the Libyan situation.
The fragmentation that you see in Libya, the fact that the country is so divided along regional, town, tribal lines, the fact that there's no coherent institution, no sovereign authority, that's given space for ISIS to emerge. And you can actually trace the emergence of ISIS to the outbreak of civil war in Libya in 2014. That's when ISIS really took advantage and expanded, because the Libyan factions were so busy fighting each other that it was ideal ground for ISIS to really flourish.
Today, the oil-rich country remains divided. A UN-backed government in the west sits in Tripoli, with jurisdiction stretching down to Sirte. A rival administration rules the east, and in between, numerous well-armed militias governed only by themselves. For its part, the U.S. continues to support the government in Tripoli with airstrikes against ISIS. But that only offers short-term solutions, according to the UN Special Envoy to Libya, Ghassan Salame.
This can produce an effect, but it's very limited effect. It's an effect on killing one particular leader or one particular chief of a band or something like that. But the real solution to terrorism in Libya is to rebuild a strong, unified, legitimate state. There is no other alternative to that.
Both governments have agreed to general elections at the end of this year, a vote that would elect a unity president and parliament. Wary says in order to stabilize the country, all factions must agree to disarm the militias and to share Libya's oil wealth, as well as political power.
I think more broadly, to win the peace, you need economic recovery. You need inclusive governance. You need a fair judiciary. Let's not forget that ISIS often emerges in prisons, and we're seeing horrific abuses inside Libyan prisons. And my fear is that that could be cultivating a new generation of radicals.
At this checkpoint in Sirte, unity seems a long way off. Troop morale is low.
We've gone a year without getting paid. We fought and died saving the city from ISIS. The government in Tripoli needs to respect that.
And take this border crossing between Libya's rival governments in the east and west. The colonel says it's become a critical weak link for ISIS to exploit.
There are more than 500 yards of no man's land between these two gates, where neither government has direct control. ISIS is using that area to take shelter, resupply, and attempt to infiltrate the city.
No-go zones are common, and they aren't relegated to checkpoints. In fact, entire swaths of Libya are lawless, and government officials fear to enter. We traveled to one such area in Libya's far western region in order to see how freely ISIS has been able to operate. Driving us is a minder from the government in Tripoli. It's the first time in nearly a year they've allowed American TV journalists to enter the country. In return, the government insists on constant supervision. On the way, we pass a checkpoint operated by the Tripoli government. ISIS recently claimed responsibility for shooting 4 people to death in an attack here. It's not long before we're completely outside the area controlled by any government. Our government minder locks all the doors.
We're in a very dangerous part of Libya right now. We've been told not to get out of the car because of the high level of gangs and Islamist militias that control the smuggling routes in this area.
Our destination, Sabratha. It's home to spectacular ruins from the Roman era, but that's not why we're here. Until recently, it was also an infamous hub for migrant traffickers. Local officials say those same traffickers work hand in hand with ISIS militants. ISIS militants, we're told, who never really left. Once a jewel of the Roman Empire, Libya's port city of Sabratha is home to an ancient amphitheater that more recently was the backdrop of a city overrun by terror. ISIS took control in 2015 and asserted its authority by beheading 12 members of the security forces and setting up its own checkpoints. Today, the tables are turned. Libyan police, loyal to the government in Tripoli, now check for ISIS militants. One of them tells me the city is safe. But checkpoints are common targets for terrorist attacks, and any one of these vehicles could be packed with explosives. Police are also looking for stolen fuel. ISIS is known to smuggle it from Libya's vast reserves and use the profits to fund their attacks. Libya's spot on the map makes it particularly attractive to terrorists. Parts of the sprawling country, 3 times the size of France, are ungoverned, and the country has largely uncontrolled borders, offering several gateways for action, says Carnegie Endowment Senior Associate Frederick Wary.
Libya is still a fertile ground, for ISIS to regroup, to conduct attacks, to include external attacks outside of Libya, whether on Tunisia or even Europe. And I think this is a huge concern for American policymakers. The U.S. has always recognized that the Libyan branch of the Islamic State was the most potent affiliate outside of Iraq and Syria. And so it could very well reemerge as a very significant threat to North Africa and to Europe. Now, they're not able to control territory like they did in 2016, but they're still able to conduct attacks, as we've seen. They're adopting a clandestine network strategy.
I visit this former ISIS base in Sabratha, where in 2016, American intelligence indicated several dozen militants had been training for an operation, possibly in nearby Europe. The US bombed the site. Among those killed was the alleged mastermind of 2 major attacks on Western tourists in neighboring Tunisia. A local approaches me and my interpreter. He says he witnessed the American airstrike. He asks us not to show his face or use his name. Everyone around here is part of the same tribe, and he could get in trouble with relatives, he says.
So you came out here when you heard the explosion.
I was the first person here.
And what did you see?
I saw smoke, rubble, and bodies everywhere. But there were survivors. Some drove away in a car. One was the leader of the ISIS cell. He's still on the loose. His wife just had a baby.
And how does he know this?
He's my uncle. Like I said, we're all part of the same tribe in this area.
We head for the beach, where just a few hundred miles of open sea separate Libya from Europe.
Until recently, this entire coastline was controlled by ISIS. It's safer now, but locals say we still need to be extremely careful because of possible sleeper cells.
We're met by a Coast Guard commander named Jalal Dabashi. He says his top priority is cracking down on illegal migrants and the well-armed gangs who traffic them.
Sabratha used to be known as the migrant capital of Libya. Traffickers smuggle the migrants from sub-Saharan Africa across the desert to the shore of the Mediterranean Sea.
Traffickers would then pack migrants in this warehouse like merchandise, he says, before shipping them off to Europe in overcrowded, rickety boats. Sometimes, he adds, traffickers here worked hand in hand with ISIS, and in nearby locations still do.
They share a common interest, money. When ISIS was around, trafficking was at its peak. Traffickers paid ISIS a tax so they could send migrants across the sea to Europe. We're talking 3 or 4 boatloads every day, millions of dollars per month. Sometimes they would even put terrorists on the migrant ships to Europe. I heard this directly from the biggest trafficker in Sabratha. He happens to be my cousin.
Sorry, your cousin is a migrant trafficker. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes, he is my cousin. Me, I'm an officer of the law.
Tribal bonds run deep in Sabratha, but that doesn't mean everyone gets along with those in their tribe.
He sends me threatening messages. He wants to kill me.
Dabashi plays the most recent death threat. His cousin calls him the biggest cockroach he's ever seen. Even if you're in an armored car, he continues, I will burn you alive inside. You will see my revenge. The two cousins eventually met in battle. Late last year, Libyan security forces attacked traffickers positioned at the ancient ruins of Sabratha, severely damaging the UNESCO heritage site.
So that's from an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade.
A local security official shows me the aftermath.
So on this side you had the Libyan army, on the other side you had the traffickers, and this monument was trapped in the middle.
Yes, trapped in the middle.
He tells me Libyan security forces eventually won, but the traffickers continue their lucrative migrant trade in neighboring towns. Fighting traffickers is just one more front in this battle for control of a brittle country. Libya has been in turmoil ever since the 2011 NATO-backed overthrow of strongman Muammar Gaddafi. This summer, some of the most violent clashes in years erupted between rival factions, killing over 100 people in the capital Tripoli. The chaos works in ISIS's favor, says the Carnegie Endowment's Fred Wary.
I've always argued that the best, recruiter for ISIS is Libya's political turmoil, is its political fragmentation, because this creates economic despair, it creates political losers who gravitate toward radicalization. And just now, in the midst of all this fighting, you've seen an uptick in attacks by the Islamic State.
Ghassan Salame is the UN Special Envoy to Libya.
The only way to fight terrorist groups on the longer term and in a systematic way is that you have a national authority doing that, controlling its borders, controlling its territory, and moving around to repress any terrorist activity. Do we have that now in Libya? The answer is clearly no.
It's a problem that vexes Colonel Ibrahim Bin Rabaa, the commander of counter-terrorism forces in the city of Sirte. He told us how he witnessed ISIS's trademark cruelty when they ruled his city and killed his son in battle. His men eventually defeated ISIS here. But now, less than 2 years later, he says, militants are regrouping and waiting to strike again.
Just yesterday, my men spotted several ISIS militants trying to re-enter the city. We almost didn't let you journalists come today because it was too dangerous. ISIS has not disappeared.
But Libya has other problems. Rival factions in Tripoli are violently challenging the authority of the UN-backed government. In response, the UN-backed government has transferred some 300 counter-terrorism troops from around western Libya to quell the violence in the capital. That means fewer soldiers looking out for ISIS. Rabaa says underestimating Islamic State can have serious repercussions far beyond Libya. If the terror group is not stopped here, he says, it's just a matter of time before ISIS grows and strikes again elsewhere.
The Islamic State is not only our problem. It's like a cancer spreading all around the world. Today, ISIS is here. Tomorrow, it can spread again somewhere else. It's as simple as that.